just if you're with friends, have a glass of red wine. Just know, okay, my sleep's not going to be great.
No, thank you, Matt.
And, yeah, that's right. And
I'm joking.
You know, I'm not. Yeah, whatever. It's just live life.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not saying that.
I was thinking there about the other sort of behavioural things that we do that harm our sleep as well. We talked about coffee earlier on, avoiding that. It's weird that people drink it after dessert in the evening. So never understood that. I guess that's an old tradition. But the other thing, obviously, that the modern generation are even more susceptible to is to have a quick TikTok. Look at the social media account or something. Now, I thought, there's a lot of different products out there that are trying to help with the light that comes from these screens that I think is the cause of what's keeping us awake. But there's this little button called dark mode on my iPad. Oh, there's also one called night shift. So if I just pop that on, Bob's your uncle. and I can crack on with my screen time. True or false?
Partly true.
Oh, good. Okay, partly. So I can just pop that on night mode and dark mode, and then I can carry on using my iPad.
Partly true. So it turns out that the blue light from screens does have an impact on sleep. So there's a great study done by Harvard Medical School by some colleagues there, and they showed that reading for an hour on an iPad just before bed, relative to just reading a book in dim light, firstly, it delayed the time with which people fell asleep, so it took them a lot longer to fall asleep. Second, it reduced the total amount of sleep that they had. Third, it decreased a sleep-related hormone called melatonin. It delayed the release of that melatonin, and it reduced the amount of melatonin. And finally, it reduced the amount of rapid eye movement sleep. So it had
significantly.
The
melatonin point, how significantly?
So it delayed the release by about somewhere between 90 minutes to 2 hours across the individuals. So in other words, your brain wasn't. So what melatonin does? It's called the hormone of darkness, or the vampire hormone, just because it makes you want to bite into people's necks, because it signals to your brain that it's nighttime, that it's darkness. And so your brain needs the signal of melatonin for it to understand when is it dark. In other words, it needs to understand by way of melatonin when it is time to fall asleep. And when you're bathed in electric light at night, and especially when you're getting blue light from these devices, your brain is fooled into thinking it's still daytime. And when there is light emitting through your retina, coming into your brain, it signals to a part of your brain to hit the brakes on melatonin, and your brain will not release melatonin. So what was happening with this iPad reading is that you were artificially telling the brain it's still daytime, and the brakes on melatonin were still shut on. And so melatonin was not starting to be released until much later. And what was also interesting about that study, by the way, is that when they stopped the iPad reading, the sleep-disrupted pattern continued for several days later. In other words, it was almost like a drug, that it had a washout period, that was a blast radius to it. Now, there's been some great work by a wonderful sleep scientist in Australia, Michael Gradazar, and he has added to this story. And he said it's not just the blue light. These devices, the principal function of these devices is that they are attention capture devices. Just like you said, I'm just going to have a wee little TikTok before bed. They are in the attention economy, and all they care about is capturing your attention for currency, and they make a lot of money from it. What that attention does is that it stimulates your brain, and when your brain is stimulated, it's very difficult for you to fall asleep, and it creates what we call sleep procrastination, where you're lying in bed and you could be perfectly sleepy and you could fall asleep right now. But then you sort of check social media and you think, I'll just shoot that last email, and then I'll order that last thing on Amazon, and then you get a text back from your friend and you start texting them, and then you look up and it's now an hour later and you're an hour deficient on sleep. So it's the activation of your cerebral cortex by these devices that is perhaps the more harmful aspect of them regarding your sleep. Now, here again, I don't want to be finger wagging. The genie of technology is out the bottle, and it's not going back in anytime soon. There's nothing that I'm going to say as a sleep researcher that's going to change that. I don't take my phone into my bedroom. I put my phone out in the kitchen, and I don't see it until morning. But lots of people do, and fair enough. But there's another rule that I've stolen from another friend called Michael Grandner, who's here in America at the university. of Tucson in Arizona, he has this great rule regarding technology, and it's the following, that if you really must take your phone into your bedroom, you can only use it standing up. And what you'll find is that after about 6 or 7 minutes standing up, you think, I'm just going to sit down on the bed. And at that point, as soon as your backside hits the bed, you're done. You've got to put the phone away. I think it's a great rule of thumb if you need to take technology in the bedroom.
I'm going to apply that. The other thing I wanted to ask was about sleep and weight loss. Had a lot of health experts on this podcast recently, but none of them have really talked to me about the role that sleep or sleep deprivation plays in weight. Is there a relationship?
It's probably one of the most well-defined relationships that we know in all of sleep science. And it is at least a 3-part story. So the first emerging evidence came in terms of hormones. So there are what we call appetite-regulating hormones, and the 2 principal ones of concern here are something called leptin and ghrelin. Now, leptin, when it's released, will signal to your brain that you're satisfied with your food, you are satiated, and you are no longer hungry. Ghrelin does the opposite. When ghrelin is released, it says, no, you're not satisfied with your food, you are not full, you still want to eat more, you are still hungry. And some of the first studies, they started to just limit people, restrict people's sleep to 6 hours or 5 hours or 4 hours. And what they found was that there was, firstly, that signal leptin that says, no, you're satisfied with your food, you don't want to eat anymore, you're full. That signal of fullness, satiation, was decreased by 18%. If that wasn't bad enough, ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, that leapt up by 28%. Overall hunger levels rose by about 26%. So firstly, it's almost like double jeopardy, that you are getting punished twice for the same crime of not sleeping enough. Once by losing the signal of, I'm full, I don't want to eat anymore. And once again for the, no, I'm much more hungry and I'm just going to overeat, which is ghrelin. So what that produces is a profile of increased eating. So on average, underslept individuals started to eat in those studies about 300 to 400 extra calories at each sitting by way of insufficient sleep. Then what they discovered is that it's not just that you want to eat more, it's what it is that you have a craving for when you are underslept. And this is the problem. What they found is that when you are underslept, you eat more of everything, but you especially eat more of these heavy-hitting, stodgy carbohydrates. Bread, pasta, pizza. The next thing that you started to eat, have a preference for, was simple sugary foods, sweets and chocolate. And then finally you started to crave very salty food. And high sodium food intake will increase your blood pressure. So that was the first of the 3 mechanisms. Then we did a study where we said, perhaps it's not just the circulating hormones in the body. The brain is the ultimate arbiter of your food decisions. So what's going on in the brain? So we took a group of perfectly healthy individuals and we put them through the experiment twice. Once when they'd had a full 8 hours of sleep, and once when we deprived them of sleep. And the next day we placed them inside an MRI scanner and we showed them images of lots of different foods that range from being sort of, very healthy to being very unhealthy, and ice cream and, chocolate and pizza and things, to leafy salads and nuts and greens and vegetables. And we asked them to rate how much they wanted that food for each item. Now we did something a bit sort of dastardly to make it more ecologically correct, so that they weren't just saying, okay, they probably think I should probably say that's healthy. We said, we're going to randomly select one of these images, these food images that you see, and after you get out the brain scanner, we're going to give you that food and we're going to politely ask you to eat it all. So it made it a bit more realistic, so the choices were more, as much as we could. So what we found is that when they were sleep deprived, the deep hedonic centers, the emotional centers of the brain, these desire centers, these reward centers, they ramped up in their activity in response to these highly desirable, highly unhealthy foods. So these more basic sort of, guttural parts of the brain, as it were, these reward centers were lighting up much more strongly when you were sleep deprived. Worse still, the impulse control regions in the front of the brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, they were shut down, they were taken offline. So as a consequence, you lost your impulse control, and that's why you start to then say, when I'm sleep deprived at the food sort of buffet, I'm not going to do salad. I'm just going to, that pizza looks awful good, or that pasta with the cream, I'm just going to go into that, all go. So it's what we call a pattern in terms of brain activity in neuroscience of hedonic eating, that your brain goes into this hedonic desire profile. So now we understood it's not just hormones in the body, it's also changes in the brain. Then came the finding that there's another chemical in the body that's responsible. And this comes on to cannabis. When people when people that you may know have smoked cannabis, they'll often say, I get viciously hungry, I get the munchies, I get really hungry. That's no coincidence, because cannabis will stimulate appetite. Now, we all have naturally occurring cannabis compounds in our brain and our bodies. They are called endocannabinoids. Endo meaning comes from inside us, whereas the cannabis that comes externally when you sort of smoke it or take edibles. So endocannabinoids do many things for the brain and the body, but one of the things that they do is control your appetite and your hunger. And what we found is that when you sleep-deprived individuals, these naturally occurring endocannabinoids rocketed up by over 20%.